Hello and welcome to this episode of the Pensions Perspective podcast, brought to you by WTW. I'm your host, Sophie Tennyson, an investment consultant here, and today I'm joined by Helen Perrin, Head of Financial Planning at WTW, and we're going to be discussing pensions, but in the context of broader financial well-being. As the podcast title suggests, pensions is just part of the puzzle that members are trying to solve for. So welcome, Helen. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, yes. So I head up our financial planning group here at WTW. We're a team of regulated financial planners who provide education, guidance and advice to individuals. So we basically get involved whenever there is a need to directly support individuals. So from a pension scheme perspective, that might be helping them understand their pension provision, any changes to that. So delinking exercises are a popular topic at the moment. And then in the DC world, those decisions around contributions, investments, how to access pension benefits at the point of retirement.
Thank you for joining me today for this
Thank you for having me.
If I had to put you on the spot, what would be your favourite part of your role?
So that's quite an easy one, actually. I think just, being on the ground, talking to people, helping them understand their personal finance decisions. When you see that sort of light bulb go on and they get it, or, you've helped someone achieve a financial goal, it's just the best part of the job.
It must be really rewarding seeing those real life impacts on people. And today we're going to be discussing how trustees and sponsors can support an evolving workforce. So when they go through different stages of life, how they can support them through their financial wellness. Think about what the wealth market and the DC institutional market can learn from each other, and also how trustees and sponsors can support overall members. So to kick us off with quite a large question, what can the DC institutional market learn from the wealth market, given you've got the knowledge of both?
So I think in the wealth market, we're very focused on the individual. So, what is the individual's objective? What are they trying to achieve? Understanding their circumstances and objectives in order to help them build a financial plan. And I guess that's probably something we can lean on in the pensions industry in terms of, looking at that individual and what they are trying to achieve, rather than talking about sort of product and features, bringing it back to what are your goals and how do we help you achieve those.
I think that's really interesting because we had a podcast on where we had a Paul Davies, a behavioural psychologist on, and he was saying how that personalisation, feeling like an individual, being seen, can be really make a difference to how a member feels.
Yeah.
Be quite a powerful persuasion technique as well.
Yeah, and I think we are seeing that more and more in communications with members where, it'll have your name, dear Helen, or it will have a topic that's relevant to you in a targeted communication as opposed to sort of general newsletter coming out.
So I'll ask the flip of that question then. What do you think the wealth market could learn from the DC institutional space?
I think there's probably quite a lot. I mean, I think, we've made such good progress in the pensions industry over the last 10 years with things like, really good quality default investments, auto-enrolment, taking that inertia and that decision-making away from individuals. And then we've got guided retirement coming where, we're going to support people with defaults to access their pension benefits. So I think, in the wealth market, we can definitely learn from the power of taking some of that complication and decision making away from people and just having nice, easy solutions that people can default into without having to know all of the ins and outs of and detail of that investment or, that plan.
And I think investments is that topic that just feel overwhelming to certain people.
It can feel a scary topic, investment, and it doesn't need to be. So,
And then thinking about the membership more broadly and where pensions fit into that, I'm mindful that there are always competing pressures on finances, whether that's paying off debt or saving for your first home or even kind of care costs for elderly parents. Where do you see pensions sitting in that equation for members when you have those discussions with them?
Yes, so you can't really talk about pensions in isolations, or members don't think about pensions in isolations. They're going to think about their short and long term financial needs. our global benefits attitude survey this year again has shown an increase in money, people stressed about money. So if you're talking to somebody who is stressed about their money and you say to them, you need to put more into your pension, you're not on track for retirement, that's just going to make them more stressed. Whereas if you can have a conversation around their broader financial position, you can help them build a plan that takes into account their short and long-term goals, repayment of debt and mortgages and so on, and potentially save money through budgeting and cost management, perhaps even using employee discounts, that's going to be a much more helpful conversation for that individual than just talking about you need to increase your pension contributions.
I'll link the Global Benefits Survey in the notes for the podcast because it is really interesting to see how attitudes have changed over time. And especially kind of post-pandemic as well.
Yeah, we've seen a real increase, since pandemic, and it hasn't come down because we've had inflationary pressures and all sorts since then as well.
Yeah, cost of living crisis, you can kind of really see that impact play out. But I imagine members' needs don't stay static either. So a younger member might have different priorities, paying off debts, saving for a first deposit, meeting rent, compared to a member in the middle of their life where they might be thinking more about childcare or investments, to a member approaching a retirement where they're thinking, how can I transform this pension and savings into an income for life? So does the approach to pensions change at different points as well?
I think so, yeah. And, it's difficult to sort of completely generalise across different demographics. But I think, what we find is when we are trying to engage younger members, we might sort of talk about saving and investing for your future rather than we're going to run a pensions education session or, financial coaching as opposed to pensions guidance. Whereas when you get to my age, in my late 40s, suddenly pensions becomes a really key topic and I'm suddenly really popular with everyone wanting to talk to me about their pension. Then actually you do want to do more targeted, pensions guidance or countdown to retirement session, for example, on the education piece. And, like I say, I think we're seeing that in the way that we communicate with members to sort of reach out to particular demographics with more targeted messaging that's going to resonate with them better.
I think that's a really interesting point and probably quite a simple one of just the language that's being used in communications to attract members, just making sure that it is broad enough that it would be interesting to different members at different stages of life.
Yeah, and you really see that in the sort of engagement levels and who's actually engaging with that material, the way that you position it.
One of the challenges that trustees face is supporting members sufficiently without crossing the line of providing regulated advice. So I'd be interested to know how you feel that's landed. Are members getting sufficient support, or is that nervousness around crossing the line leaving members not as supported as they should be?
Yeah, so I guess trustees and employers are understandably nervous of being too helpful or, too sort of directional in the support that they give. I think, the FCA's targeted support initiative should help with that. It sets the sort of the boundaries around what you can say and, you can be quite definitive with groups of individuals around, you need to be paying more into your pension or you need to be investing in a different way at a younger age and, perhaps take more risk. So I think that should help trustees and employers feel more comfortable with how far they can go through those sort of group type messages. I think, the FCA have also been quite clear on that boundary between guidance and advice. And actually, there's quite a high threshold to cross into regulated advice. You basically have to be giving a personal recommendation for a regulated product. So I think we are seeing more creativity in providing individual support through coaching and guidance as well, which allows trustees and employers to give access to large numbers of people that individual support that they need.
I think you're quite right. In your response, you referred to trustees and employers there in terms of both having responsibility here. I guess, where do you see that split forming between trustees and sponsors in terms of how they can support members throughout their whole working life?
Yeah, and there is a focus within the industry on what's a trustee and what's an employer responsibility, but from members on the ground, they don't really distinguish between the two. They just see it as a company pension scheme. And so I think, there is a need for trustees and employers to work together to build comprehensive financial wellbeing programs that cover pensions and wider finances. And, I think trustees and employers do, work together to do that. So,
and I guess one of the criticisms often levelled at the wealth market is around the cost. It seemed maybe as expensive or maybe only appropriate for the more wealthy members within the plan. I guess what would your response be to that? Because I think it is difficult of kind of where that value lies for some.
Yeah, so I guess the first point there is that it does make it cheaper if an employer or trustee facilitate that advice. You know, in the advice industry, a lot of the time that we spend is truly understanding the scheme details for a member and potentially their employee benefit options as well, to make sure that we've taken all that into account and have got the right plan for that individual. So actually, by facilitating advice, employers and trustees can make that more accessible to individuals. And we see that, you know, in the US, it's much more common to have workplace financial advice. And we see, you know, around 30% of people in the US take advice versus less than 10% in the UK. So you can see that makes a difference. And I think, you know, in terms of that sort of value add, if you get the right advice and around tax planning and investment allocation and things like that, it can easily pay for itself for the right groups of individuals. But there are also individual support options that don't have to cost as much as regulated financial advice. It is a highly regulated area. So providing financial coaching and guidance to individuals can get that individual support that people need without the high costs of financial advice in some cases.
And I guess there's the three services as well, Pensions Wise, Money Helper, that trustees and sponsors can direct members to get some free guidance as well.
Yeah, and you know, there's not enough awareness around those services being out there. So I think that's something that trustees and employers can easily signpost to get people some support as well.
It's so interesting that it's less than 10% in the UK. I wouldn't have thought it would be so low.
Yeah, with a very low end scale of taking advice and also on investing. You know, the UK are known for sticking their money in cash and not sort of taking that longer term view on investing.
I guess all the conversations we've had in the investment team about productive finance and trying to invest in the UK, that I was aware of, but the individual support is it's really low. Now we talked about supporting needs of memberships and how that kind of flex as members go through different points in their life. And I guess an obvious one is members approaching retirement. It's one of the biggest, most complex decisions for a lot of members to kind of tackle. We've got the new guided retirement support and discussions around decumulation. Do you think guided retirement has solved a lot of the complexities around decumulation for members, or is there more to be done there?
Yes, so guided retirement is obviously a very positive step. At the moment, we're seeing far too many people cash their pensions out because they just don't know what to do with it, and there's too much choice. So I think, you know, guided retirement in terms of having a default decumulation strategy is very positive. I think we also need to make sure that the education comes around that. So as well as having a default for people, that they understand how that default works and how that links into their retirement planning. You know, most people now will have 2 or 3 potential pensions at the point of retirement. So they're also going to be dealing with different defaults in different schemes, and they need to have a sort of overall plan around how they bring that together to meet their retirement needs.
And I guess pensions dashboards would be one tool to help members see their pots in different places. But I think what you've touched on there is really interesting of guided retirement, I guess, helps hopefully members not taking action like you referred to before, of just cashing out because I don't know what to do with it. There is something there available. And then there's just that education piece as to what that looks like compared to others out there.
Yeah, and I think, you know, dashboards, again, it's a great step forward. It helps people collate all that information, and it also gives us a great platform to then signpost the right education tools for people to use that money in the best way for them.
It's a good example of how technology is kind of improving things. And I couldn't not ask you about AI, Helen. It is the topic at the moment. And I guess AI, just anecdotally from conversations I'm having with friends and family, are using these tools to talk about really complex decision making in lives. Do you think members are trusting these tools enough when it comes to looking for financial advice or support when it comes to making big financial decisions?
Yes, I think we're definitely seeing an increase in people using AI for financial decisions. I think we're still at the stage at the moment for the really big ones. So, you know, the at retirement piece, for example, where people do want a bit more reassurance that, you know, the information is accurate and takes into account their personal circumstances and their scheme information. But, you know, it's constantly evolving, the AI technology, and I'm sure we will get to a point where everybody can get that sort of individual support through AI tools. We just need to make sure that we're using that in a responsible way for now and putting the controls in place for that.
Yeah, and it's really hard to even think about what this could look like in decades' time in terms of the use of AI.
Yeah.
And it feels like a real generational change. The same, I guess, how social media is. You know, the younger generations are really interacting in it in a way that has never been interacted with before. And I know, I guess that leads to benefits and negatives really when it comes to the information that's out there. I guess what are your thoughts on, I guess, social media raising the conversation around finance in those kinds of forums?
Yeah, I mean, social media has definitely driven engagement with personal finances, which should be a good thing. And I think if you sort of think about the original influencers, or influencers as we call them in the financial world, you're talking about, you know, Martin Lewis, the nation's money saving expert, and he's done great things for people engaging with their personal finances. And so there's lots of positive information and impartial information out there. We do also see, unfortunately, people who aren't quite so interested in getting the right information to people, or impartial information to people. And we did a bit of an exercise where we sort of Googled pensions on TikTok, and you get all sorts of messages back around, you know, workplace pensions being terrible value, don't go near your workplace pension, come and put all your money in crypto, or, you know, FedEx exchange, currency trading. So I think social media can be a very positive thing in driving that engagement, but we also need to make sure that we are engaging with members and employees to get them the positive information about their workplace pension and the employee benefits available to them as well. And perhaps we can learn from social media in the way that we engage, and, you know, having that sort of really short, engaging, bite-sized information, but make sure that they know where they can go for reliable information as well.
I'm glad you mentioned Martin Lewis. I remember being a student and my dad posted me newspaper articles I read about him. But I think the misinformation piece is the most scary. You know, I remember, like you said, I think we did it at a conference where we posted some examples of some of the misinformation that is out there, and it is really concerning.
Yeah, and the FCA are focused on that as well. You know, I think it's back in April that they did a bit of a sort of searching through various social media accounts, and the stats were, I think, some of those misinformation adverts that they'd asked to be taken down had reached like 2.3 million social media accounts. So misinformation can quickly spread, and we do need to tackle that as well. Yeah,
and it's huge numbers. So final question then, Helen. If there was one thing that you would change when it comes to supporting members throughout their whole journey, accumulation, their work life, and looking to retirement, what would that be?
So I guess it's been a bit of a theme throughout this session. Yeah. But I think it's just that personalisation of support. And I think it doesn't have to be, you know, everyone has regulated financial advice. It's just more sort of those targeted messages, getting individual support in a lower cost environment. And, you know, AI is going to definitely play a part of that in the future as well, to make sure that people can get the support they need.
I think even just from our conversation, the bit I've kind of taken away is that importance of the language used. You know, some certain terms will just turn certain members off, whereas if you broaden that language, it can really kind of improve engagement. So it's really interesting. But thank you so much for your time, Helen. It's been lovely to chat to you today.
Thank you for having me.
It's been great. And thank you to our listeners for joining us again for an episode of our Pensions Perspective podcast, brought to you by WTW. We hope you'll join us again soon. Thank you. Thanks for listening. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute financial advice. The views expressed by any hosts and guests are their own and may not reflect those of their employers or affiliated organisations. All content is protected by copyright.